Welcome everyone to Zillow Speaker Series, and we are so excited for this one because I do believe it's probably one of our most exciting and most accomplished speakers we've had, and we've had quite a few amazing people. So this is so exciting today, and I'd love everyone to give a really warm Zillow welcome to Arianna Huffington. So she's someone that really needs no introduction, but I'm going to read a few words to begin with, just because I think your career and your background is just so accomplished. Arianna Huffington is the chair, president, and editor-in-chief of Huffington Post Media Group. She's a nationally syndicated columnist and an author of 14 books. And in May 2005, she launched the Huffington Post, a news and blog site that quickly became one of the most widely read, linked to, and frequently cited media brands on the internet. How many people here think you've read something on the HuffPo in the last week? Yeah, I mean, amazing. In 2012, the site won a Pulitzer Prize for national reporting. She has been named one of to Time magazine's list of the world's 100 most influential people and the Forbes most powerful women list. Her 14th book, Thrive, just was published in March, and it's called Thrive, the Third Metric to Redefining Success and Creating a Life of Well-Being, Wisdom, and Wonder. And when it launched in March, it immediately became #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So we're so excited to have... we are so excited to have you here at Zillow today. Among this audience, we also have probably hundreds of people watching from their desks as well as at our remote offices. She's going to speak to us for a few minutes, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. But let's hand it over to our guest today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. First of all, thank you for having me here. What a beautiful, gorgeous spot. I feel I'm thriving already. And it's great to meet your CMO, your founder, your CEO. What a fantastic leadership team you have here. And to see your treadmill desks, I'm getting one. Loving it. And I'm just really happy to be here to speak to a group of people who are right in the middle of the action in terms of technology, in terms of marketing, and also in terms of managing lives and careers. I mean, a lot of you, I understand, have young children. And so this is exactly, I think, the group that can help accelerate a global shift that's already happening. And let me start with my own personal journey. Then I'll talk about the global shift. And then we'll open it up to questions and points. So I wrote Thrive because 7 years ago, I had my own wake-up call when I collapsed from burnout, exhaustion, and sleep deprivation 2 years into founding the Huffington Post. Did that happen to you? No? I was wondering if that was because something happened. And so there I was. I came to in a pool of blood, and I started asking the questions that many of us stop asking after we leave college, like what is success, what is a good life? And while by conventional definitions of success I was successful, by any sane definition of success, if you wake up in a pool of blood and nobody has shot you, you're not successful. So that started me into looking at how our society defines success. And we tend to define it in terms of two metrics, money and power, or fame, however you define power. And really, this is like trying to sit on a two-legged stool. You know, nothing wrong with the two metrics, but they are not enough. We need a third metric. And without a third metric, life is completely out of control, basically. And the third metric consists of 4 pillars. And the 4 pillars are really the 4 sections in the book. The first one is well-being. You know, if you sacrifice your health and well-being on the way to success, it's just not a bargain worth making. And yet millions of people have made that bargain. And you see millions of successful people suffering from high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, collapsing like I did. You know, in fact, if there is one thing I would have done differently now that I've been around the country talking about the book is it's worse than I thought. The stories that I've heard from people are absolutely amazing, including I'm here at the Microsoft CEO Summit, and last night at dinner, I had like a number of wives come up to me and say, they gave my book to them, and they said, I've underlined my book, your book for my husband. I so much want to read him. I'm afraid he's going to have a heart attack. You know, he doesn't, it's like women are worried about what's happening to their husbands. Husbands are worried about what's happening to their wives. And it's like, we've reached like the moment of perfect storm, when we're more aware of the dangers, including the dangers of hyperconnectivity to technology, when companies like yours are beginning to introduce, you know, stress reduction practices, and there is a greater conversation around how do we work really hard and do our best at work, but at the same time not sacrifice our health, our relationships, and our joy of life. So for me, what is important is to begin taking little microscopic steps to change rather than some kind of overwhelming wholesale commitment that we're going to break. And so at the end of each section, I have 3 little steps, a total of 12 steps, because we are addicted. And the first step in the well-being section has to do with what was my most important step. You'll decide what's your most important step. Mine was sleep. I went from 4 to 5 hours to 7 to 8 hours gradually. I recommend increasing it by 30 minutes and seeing the result, and then you are drawn to do more. Or getting a nap. We have 2 nap rooms at the Huffington Post. What about nap rooms at Zillow? Now your CEO is reconsidering inviting me. So, in fact, men somehow in the last few decades made sleep deprivation a kind of badge of honor. Like, have you heard men especially brag about how little sleep they need? And I had dinner with a guy recently who bragged that he had only gotten 4 hours sleep the night before, and I thought to myself, I didn't say it, I thought to myself, you know what? This dinner would have been a lot more interesting if you had gotten 5. Also, you know, in my book, I quote Bill Clinton, who said the most important mistakes I made when I was tired. He did not specify what mistakes. So, I mean, there's a lot more information about well-being. There are 55 pages of scientific endnotes for the most stubborn skeptic here who wants tons of data about how sleep, meditation, pauses, quiet time, all these are performance enhancement tools. They are not flaky, new agey Californian inventions. The second pillar is wisdom. We see that our hyperconnectivity to technology has helped us disconnect from ourselves. And so we are all learning now how to master technology rather than be mastered by it. And the little step that I recommend here, one of the 3 steps at the end of the wisdom section, is pick a time at night when you turn off your devices and gently escort them out of your bedroom. It's really important, and read the scientific data about how important it is. Because otherwise you never have that full recharging sleep. And you don't have to listen to me. Listen to Richard Sherman from the Seattle Seahawks. He was our guest at the Huffington Post table at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I was sitting next to him, and he was telling me about sleep. He said how his coach, you know, helped him understand that he wasn't sleeping deeply enough. And what they did to help him with his breathing, etc., he said he's never felt better, and he was never better on the field. So, you know, if professional athletes recognize that, why are they ahead of business people? So the third pillar is wonder. And here you are, you have this incredible view, and you have no idea how many people will not even notice it, because they're either buried in their smartphones or in their thoughts. That's where the mind comes in. And in the wonder chapter, I talk about the dangers of multitasking. People think that that makes them more effective. In fact, it doesn't exist. It's task switching. It's one of the most stressful things we can do. And I know, as a supreme practitioner of multitasking, until I started changing, I live in New York, and I remember when I started walking without texting. It was a novel experience. I started noticing things, including there's a building near where I live, and I was just looking at how beautiful the ornamentation at the top was, and I said to a friend of mine, I said, when did that go up, that building? And she said to me, 1890. So we suddenly begin to notice, the beauty around us. We begin to listen better, which is such a great leadership skill. And also, a little step that I recommend here has to do with, at the end of the day, look and see, is there something that no longer serves you that you can drop? It can be a grudge, a resentment, or a project that you thought you were going to do, but really you're not going to. In my case, it was skiing. I thought I was one day going to become a good skier. And you know what? I'm not. So it was very liberating to realize that you can complete a project by dropping it. And I have a quote in the book by Carrie Fisher, who said, resentment is the poison you drink thinking the other person will die. So clearing the mind as well as the body is key. So the final pillar, and then we'll open it up to questions, is giving. Because life is not complete if it doesn't include connecting with others and giving. Otherwise, it becomes way too narcissistic. And our genes are wired for giving. And I have a lot of research in the book that show that giving is a real shortcut to happiness. So let me wrap it all up by saying that I was at a friend's memorial recently. And listening to the eulogy, I realized that our eulogies have very little to do with our LinkedIn profiles. Have you ever heard anybody say during a eulogy, George was amazing, he increased market share by 1/3. Eulogies are about all the other things, how we made people feel, what made us laugh, small kindnesses, lifelong passions. So it's good to remember that when we look at our lives and what we value, and how we navigate all the competing demands on our lives. Because one of the things that I've realized is that it's not really enough to be effective and productive. I really also want to bring joy into my daily life. And we can do that. And in fact, the Greeks called it enthusiasm, to be inhabited by the gods. And when you approach life with enthusiasm and joy, then I promise you, I feel that I'm more effective and more creative than ever before because I'm prioritizing these things in my life. And that way, we don't just survive, we don't just succeed, we thrive. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to start off with the first question, and then we'll open it up. Really, I think, interesting advice that, I think we've all had the experience coming back from vacation where you say, okay, I'm going to get more balance to my life. I'm going to work fewer hours. I'm going to get off social media more and not check my phone at 11 o'clock at night. And then kind of work and life catches up to you, and 3 or 4 days back in, you find yourself back in your own routine. So you clearly have not had fewer. You've probably even had more professional demands on your life since you've come to these realizations. These realizations, you're getting more sleep. You're on your phone less. but how are you keeping up with the demands, and how has that changed? Because I would guess they're the same or even more than they were a few years ago for you.
That's a great question. Let me just say, first of all, that what you said about coming back from vacations and having good intentions and then life kind of takes over is not just true about coming back from vacations. It's also true coming back from a life-threatening illness. I've had people talk to me about how they had prostate cancer. I had this producer, I was in Toronto, a producer of a show I was doing, and he said to me, I was like this burnt out person you are describing in the book. I got prostate cancer. After I went in remission for a year and a half, you know, my life was amazing. And then all my old patterns started coming in. So it's even after people have faced death. So that is why what I'm recommending is you need daily rituals, daily reminders, whatever they are, daily practices, and also a little tribe of people. It can be a tribe of one. We call them thrive buddies. You know, somebody with whom you can share that journey. You know, you can share gratitude lists, which is another step. You can, let's say, if you are, if it's late at night and you really should be going to sleep, but you are completely compelled to binge watch House of Cards. You know, that happens. You can call your thrive buddy, and they can talk you down. You know, they can tell you, now take a deep breath, close your laptop, go to sleep, and you can watch it over the weekend. I'm only partially joking, because you need that support system, because all the demands that the world is sending you are going to be contrary to that. Including, like, I think for me, what is very important is transitions, like in the morning. It's very important not to immediately go to your smartphone. Just take 1 minute. I promise you, you have 1 minute to set your intention for the day, to connect with what you are grateful for, and to basically make it very clear to yourself that you're in charge. The minute you go to your smartphone, you're basically saying the world is in charge of where your attention goes. That is like they're going to determine your agenda. Instead of you deciding, the most creative people don't live their lives simply responding to things. And I moderated a panel today at the summit on disruption. And I know it's all off the record, but the bottom line, without mentioning who was where, everybody there was a disruptor. Had all these ways that they did it, which basically meant going away, not being in the middle of dealing with all the crap, as they put it. You know, if you spend your day just in meetings and responding to email, you are not going to come up with a great game-changing ideas. I mean, Steve Jobs, I quote Steve Jobs in the book, who said his best ideas came after Zen meditation, when he could hear the whisperings, he called it, when he could hear subtler things, rather than all the noise that surrounds us. So that's incredibly important. And I find that way I'm a much more effective leader, because I can see where we need to go. I mean, HuffPost has grown dramatically in the last 7 years. We are now at 95 million uniques. And I was very clear we had to become a global company. We're now in 11 countries. 3 years ago, we were only in the US. So it's like when you know where you're going, you don't overreact when there are obstacles along the way, because there are always obstacles. And you're clear about the direction you're going. And you make fewer mistakes. I mean, I make a lot fewer mistakes. I don't hire as often the wrong people. And when I do, I fire them faster. You know, it's like all these things that get in the way of effective leadership become easier.
It sounds like there's a lot more clarity.
A lot more clarity, exactly.
And when you started to set these boundaries for yourself, how did your business associates and your teams react to that?
They loved it, because it became much easier for them. Like I said, we have company-wide email boundaries. When people are off, they're off. And they're not expected to be on email. I mean, we're a 24/7 media company, so there are always people on, but not the same people. And you know, in the end, you pay people for their judgment, not their stamina. And nobody's going to be good if they're perpetually on. And I think more and more companies are now not just realizing that, but documenting it. Even, I quote companies even like the Boston Consulting Group. They have created a red zone alert. Were you there? Maybe it's gotten better. And they've created this red zone alert system. So they track if consultants are billing for too many hours, and they do an intervention because they can see what happens to consultants who bill too many hours and what happens to their health. In the investment industry, we had suicides in the last few months, to the point when Goldman Sachs even sent a memo to young analysts saying, take weekends off, a radical idea. Ultimately, you know, we need new role models, because a lot of the role models we have are burnt out, because they also fell victims to this collective delusion that that's the only way to succeed. So for me, the first big role model is God. You know, he worked hard for 6 days and created heaven and earth, and then he rested the seventh day. So, but if you don't want to go to God, Padma Sri Warrior is a great role model. She's the Chief Technology Officer of Cisco. We had her speak at our Thrive conference. She sleeps for 8 hours, she meditates, she writes haikus, she paints, and she runs tens of thousands of engineers. And on Saturday, she does a digital detox. So you can pick God, or you can pick Padma Sri Warrior, or you can pick any number of emerging role models of how to do it differently.
This is great stuff. Let's open it up for some questions from the audience. If not, I'm going to read one from the couple dozen I got beforehand. Okay.
And when you ask a question, would you give me your name and tell me what you do?
All right. Laura.
My name's Laura. I'm a yoga teacher, and also I work in PR, so it's a very interesting balance.
Oh, great.
I'm curious to know if in your travels, promoting your book and talking to people about what they do in the workplace, you've come across any really exceptional programs where companies are including yoga and meditation as part of the workday or
And I'm just going to repeat it for people who are watching the webcast. So Laura's asking about companies doing exceptional things around yoga and wellness into the workplace. Have you heard or seen good opportunities like this?
Absolutely. I mean, let me start with the Huffington Post. We have weekly yoga, meditation, and breathing classes. And let me also mention a company that I write about in the book, Aetna, the third largest health insurance company. Mark Bertolini, its CEO, had a skiing accident, broke his neck, and the only thing that worked for him was he called his cocktail of meditation, yoga, and acupuncture. And he made the benefits available to his 49,000 employees. And then he brought Duke University in to study the impact. And they found 7% reduction in healthcare costs and a 69-minute a day improvement in productivity. So I think what is great is just this is becoming very data-driven now.
I have a question for you from Lena in our Irvine, California office. Out of all the hats that you wear, what brings you the most personal satisfaction?
Well, obviously, I wear the hat of being a mom to 2 daughters, one of whom is graduating on Sunday from college. And so I'm leaving first thing in the morning for all the festivities. And the other one, though, I want to mention that because she wrote about it, and I write about it in the book to help other young people. The other one became completely stressed out in her last year in college. And I got the call that every parent dreads one day, 2.5 years ago, when she said to me, "Mommy, I can't breathe." She had gotten involved in drugs. She's now been sober for 2.5 years. And she basically helped me see just how stressed out college kids are. You see the binge drinking that's going on, legal and illegal drugs. And so I feel it's incredibly important to start with this message when children start looking at how they navigate their lives, especially, I mean, your children are very young, but especially as they become so hyper-connected with technology that they cannot imagine walking around without something in their hand.
Related to that, actually, someone just texted in the question, do you have any advice for millennials entering the workforce? So related to that, and even with your own daughters, what advice are you giving them about this hyper-connected, work all the time world they're entering now that they're graduating?
So, I mean, I noticed from my own daughters that they've begun to absorb a lot of these messages. And the difference it makes and how the conversation is shifting among millennials. It is known as the stress generation. They are the most stressed generation.
And they learn from their parents.
And they learn from their parents, exactly. They basically copy what their parents are doing. And parents often will say, you know, no smartphones at dinner, but they pull out their smartphones surreptitiously. So I think it's so important the behavior we model, because children are absorbing everything like sponges from a very early age. And it's very sad to see that. I mean, I was at the airport the other day, and for 45 minutes waiting for the plane, across from me was a mother and her child, who must have been like 5 years old, and for the 45 minutes they did not exchange one word. They were each buried in their device. And you see that more and more. And then you wonder what's going to happen to that child in terms of human interactions later on. If you think of it, this whole conversation about the dangers of technology is relatively new. It's really the last couple of years. And now, at the back of the book, I have an appendix that has my 12 favorite apps and features to help us disconnect from technology. I know it's a paradox. At Microsoft, they asked me what do I think they should be working on. I said that you should be working on technology to help us disconnect from technology. That's the future. Because, you know, we are always going to be hooked to our devices. The question is, how can we learn to unhook ourselves, recharge ourselves, and then return? Incidentally, we really take better care of our smartphones than we take care of ourselves. I mean, if you think of it, we get these alerts on my iPhone, like 20% battery remaining, 17% battery remaining. By about 13%, I run around and looking for a recharging shrine. In case anything happens to my precious smartphone. Well, when I collapsed, I must have been below 0% battery remaining. And yet I wasn't aware of it.
It's a really interesting analogy. Let's open the question back there.
What, if anything, do you think can be done to change the business culture in the U.S. regarding vacation compared to the rest of the world, which, at least in developed countries, has so much more vacation typically than we do? And in the U.S., when you negotiate a job, you can negotiate anything you want with money, but they typically won't negotiate for vacation.
So the question was around what can be done in the U.S. Around the lack of vacation in businesses versus other countries.
So what vacation do you get here? 3 weeks. That's great. That's what we get at HuffPost too. So, I mean, you are obviously a very enlightened company. First of all, you're absolutely right. It's incredibly uneven across the states. You know, there are companies like yours and HuffPost that do 3 weeks vacation, and there are others where it becomes a struggle. The same with maternity leave, paternity leave, etc. But this shift that we are talking about is happening all across the world. I mean, every country is battling with these issues right now. The other issue, though, is what do we do on vacation? Because there was a survey done recently that shows that over 50% of people return from vacation just as exhausted because they are trying to keep up with work, which even becomes more draining than you're at work or you're on vacation. I think the hardest thing is when you try to be in two places at once. So, I mean, I did our last vacation, our last Christmas vacation, we're in Hawaii, and two girlfriends and I did a digital detox for a week. And it was absolutely wonderful. Did you know that you can have a meal without Instagramming it? I discovered a lot of things. You can also watch a sunset without Instagramming it. So, and then we wrote about it. All three of us wrote about it, and we got a tremendous response from people who are now increasingly doing their own digital detoxes, especially on vacation.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I have a good question from Desiree in our San Francisco office. What would you tell your 30-year-old self about fear?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would tell my 30-year-old self, basically to stop worrying, and how many of our fears are completely made up. I have actually a good quote about that in the book by Montaigne, the French philosopher, who said there were many terrible things in my life, but most of them never happened. So that's why all this practice about meditation or prayer or whatever you want to do or call it in your life, they're all about bringing us present. Because a lot of pain and anxiety and fear come from not being present. You know, even when bad things happen, like what happened with my daughter or what may have happened in your lives in terms of sickness, I mean, really, when we are present, we're dealing with it. What is harder is kind of imagining it, worrying about it, fearing it. And our bodies do not distinguish between something bad really happening and something imaginary bad happening. So as a result, we're in a perpetual fight or flight mode. And that's the ultimate stress.
Other questions? Tony.
Tony in sales, how have these epiphanies since 7, 8 years ago, how have they affected your political views?
Just to repeat it, how have these epiphanies affected your political views in the last few years?
So, not so much my political views, but what they have affected is my understanding of why we are in such a terrible shape politically. And in fact, we're covering that, but we're also starting a new series called Washington Soul, because if you look at politicians, they're completely burnt out. I mean, we wrote a story about a congresswoman whose daughter, her 10-year-old daughter, she asked her daughter, what do you want for your birthday? And she said, all I want for my birthday, I'm going to tear up, it's so sad. She said, all I want for my birthday is for you to get off your phone.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, it just makes you feel, wow. And so, you know, and most of the time they're on their phones, they're fundraising. So you have these, like, leaders, basically, who are completely burnt out, who also, most of them, and there are obviously good exceptions, but not enough, have so identified with the two metrics that they really think that if they don't have their job, they will not have their identity. And as a result, they don't really take bold decisions. They don't cast the tough votes. I mean, why do you think we have 90% of the American people in favor of background checks for guns, and we don't have background check legislation? Because even 4 Democratic senators voted against background checks because they're worried about their re-election. It's like, what are you doing there? What's the point of being in the Senate, right?
I mean, it goes back to the question about fear. It's plain and
Yes,
safe.
exactly, yeah. But, you know, if you think that you are not going to exist if you're not a senator, you're obviously going to play it safe. If you realize that life is not just about my job, your job, their job, but that you are more than that, then you make different decisions. And also the whole burnout culture at the White House. the idea that I mean, the numbers of people who are just doing research, who are burnt out, who go, I mean, the chief of staff of Harry Reid had a mini stroke, and the way they work, you know, it's insane. It's not just insane for them and their families. They're not making good decisions, and you see that everywhere.
Well, and I think it's also probably a cultural thing that's keeping some of the best and the brightest from going into politics.
Absolutely, that's so true. Yes, because who wants to get involved in that world? And I was talking recently to Gene Sterling, who was the president's chief economic advisor until he resigned recently to go with his wife to California because she's working in Hollywood as a writer. And he was telling me how thrilled he is that he can now really be a father to his daughter. And he gave me this example. He said, even when I was at the White House, I would not miss her recitals. But I would tell my staff, you know, 3 to 4, block it. But he said on the phone, I would be on the phone in the car going there. I would be texting as I walked into the recital room. And when I was there, I was not really there. My mind was back at the White House. And he said now, it's like, I mean, the guy was literally tearing up about what he was going to have completely missed. And I know for myself, I never missed my daughter's events, but was I really there? And that's the thing. And the difference between being there fully as opposed to just being physically there is enormous.
I think that's one of the nuances that people miss a lot in our kind of always on society, is the difference between being present and really present.
Yes.
That being there physically but checking and not paying attention to the soccer game isn't the same.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
You clearly have a wonderful sense of humor. I'm a big fan. So have you ever met Tracy Ullman, and how did you feel about Tracy Ullman?
Oh yeah, I love Tracy Ullman. She does a great imitation of me.
The question was about Tracy Ullman. Have you ever met her?
Yeah, but I think Nassim's imitation on Saturday Night Live is better. In fact, I don't know if you saw it, but for our 9th anniversary, HuffPost was 9-year-old last Friday. Our HuffPost staff did a competition who was going to do the best imitation of me. And it's online. I think Joe Satran, who writes about food for us, did a pretty awesome imitation.
So one question I was emailed before, where's online journalism going? Who will pay for the kind of reporting necessary to check our government and corporations? And just to kind of elaborate on that, I think what's meant here is journalism today, there's so much quick publish, you know, reporters that years ago used to have a day or multiple days to put together a really thoughtful, well-researched story, now have to have 5 deadlines a day, and we're losing a lot of the kind of real, true reporting that used to define how we checked our
Right.
politicians.
But we don't have to. Like, I mean, I feel that the future is going to be a combination of, in the same entity, of being a journalistic enterprise with precisely the practices you are referring to, and a platform. I mean, at HuffPost, we have journalists who may work for 9 months on a series of stories, like the series that won us a Pulitzer by our military correspondent, David Wood, on the lives of returning vets. It took him 9 months. You know, nobody rushed him. And we do a lot of stories like that on big, you know, issues, private prisons, loans to students and what's going on, the failed war on drugs, you know, big series like that our reporters are doing. There is no problem in terms of being online or being in print in doing these stories. It's just a question of editorial priorities and being, obviously, having the business model, which in our case is to be entirely advertising supported, that sustains it. But our advertising is very different. You know, we do big sponsored sections, we do native advertising, so there are many other opportunities. It's way beyond traditional advertising.
I got a question from Matt, who's our head of SEO and in our New York office today, wanting to ask you how search engine optimization plays into HuffPo. And I think kind of more broadly with that, at the organization, how do you balance the need to have stories rank high in Google search and get lots of traffic and views so that you can sell advertising impressions against them versus the agenda of what your writers want to write about, not necessarily what's going to get the most page views and help with rankings the most?
We have actually demonstrated that good content is also for us the content that goes most viral. And now, since virality is even more important than SEO, we are finding that people want to share stories. I mean, these stories, the Thrive stories, we have 26 sections that deal with different elements of the thriving message. Our healthy living section, our politics site is still the #1 politics site in the States. But last month, our healthy living traffic surpassed the politics traffic. And that's because I think the public is so interested in these stories. And these are precisely, I mean, if you read something about how to get better sleep, that's precisely what you would share with your husband or your friends, or, because you want to share something that brings value to your life. And also the other stories that are incredibly viral are stories that demonstrate kind of the better angels of our nature, like stories of compassion, ingenuity, that make you feel good about being human. And we have a dedicated section called Good News section, which is, if you're ever depressed, you should go there. And you know, we have a waiting list for sponsors, because also brands want to be identified with that content. So I think, you know, it can be a positive virtuous cycle as opposed to a negative cycle, but it has to start with having the right editorial priorities and not approach it in terms of what will be the fastest clickbait.
What drove, and maybe you can give a little insight into maybe the discussion or the whiteboard brainstorm that drove creating that good news section? Because that's something really that you don't see anywhere else that's quite novel in journalism today.
You know, I've always believed, first of all, you know, everything that you know, Maya Angelou said, when you learn, teach. So everything I learn, I turn into an editorial project. So 7 years ago, we launched a sleep section, a dedicated sleep section. And there was a lot of eye rolling, trust me. Now, there's hardly any major university that does not have a sleep division. And I have been such a sleep evangelist that, in fact, the Harvard School of Medicine sleep division invited me to join their board. So, but our sleep section, if you go to it now, is just truly, not because it's HuffPost, it's pretty amazing. It has like the latest research, the best kind of stories from people. And the same happened with the good news section. It's like, I'm always very interested in how can we teach our children that giving back, you know, is part of their lives in a very organic, easy way. And so I wanted to have a section where all these stories could be aggregated. And because we get so much content from our bloggers, we encourage them to write about these things. In fact, I want to invite you all to write about these things. And to make it easy for you, I'm going to give you my email address. And you can bypass the Huffington Post bureaucracy. It's Arianna, Arianna, @HuffingtonPost.com. And do you have a good email address? When you're the founder, you get a good email address. You see? And also, we started a campaign, #HowIThrive, that we call it like sharing recipes. So that's sharing thriving recipes. And we learn from each other. So you please use that too.
Here's a question from Melody at our Lincoln, Nebraska office with Mortec. If you didn't work the hours you did earlier in life, do you think you would have reached the career level you're currently at?
1,000% yes. I would have achieved just as much, if not more, but with less worry, less damage to my health and my relationships and fewer mistakes. Absolutely guaranteed.
Yeah.
How do you adopt this mentality that you're talking about in, not saying this is Zillow, but in a general environment where others around you haven't adopted it and kind of view you as being lazy?
So the question is, how do you adopt this in an environment where your coworkers aren't living this way?
Well, first of all, there is no way anybody would think you're lazy, because it doesn't mean that you're, on the contrary, you would be arriving at work probably more recharged than anyone else. And you would be fully present and fully committed and fully giving while you're at work. So there are, at the same time, I totally agree with you, people who think if you're not available 24/7 and at weekends, that you are not doing your job. So in that case, what I suggest is, A, if you can change companies, but let's say you can't. I mean, there are realities in people's lives and you can't. I suggest that you very politely just say, after you do a fantastic job when you are on, say, you know, if you need me over the weekend, here's my cell, call me or text me, implying I'm not online. But if you need me, I'm available. So you're not saying I'm disappearing if there is an emergency. And also, this is like changing. We now are in this moment of transition where all sorts of behavior, from the most barbaric to the most enlightened, are coexisting, often within the same company, the same family. It's like this is that moment. And what is important is, when you realize what supports you, it's like, you know, they say on the airplane, put your own oxygen mask first. Then you have your responsibility is to put your own oxygen mask first. And then you'll be a better employee, a better mother, a better wife, a better everything, because you're not operating on empty. I mean, you know, I know when I'm running on empty, I'm irritable, I'm annoying.
You're so quotable. I can't wait to see all the tweets that are coming out of this. Over here, Kevin.
Oh, that's great. It's a great place, isn't it?
I'm curious how you met up with Richard Sherman, and if there were any nuggets at the correspondence dinner when Obama was riffing on.
Twice, yes.
Yeah, the question was about sitting with Richard Sherman at the correspondence dinner and how that worked out.
Oh, I loved him. We invited him. You know, part of the tradition of the correspondence dinner is you invite people. You don't have to know them. You invite people to join. We had 3 tables, and but I chose to sit next to him. And we invited him, and he came with his girlfriend. And I found him absolutely charming and adorable. And what was so funny is that compared to, say, some other celebrities we've had, like one year we had Scarlett Johansson, last year we had John Bon Jovi and Chris Christie, and
together. I love it. New Jersey's best.
I had a picture taken between my New Jersey boys, you know. And often, you know, you get lines of people to come to the table to meet them, and we've never had a longer line than with Richard Sherman. People just really want to shake his hand, all those burned out Washington politicians.
We have time for probably 2 more questions. Others? Yeah, Amanda.
In your observations, have you seen companies that have formalized, like, giving back programs, kind of similar to like what Laura mentioned? Have you noticed an impact on what that has on the employees and corporate culture?
So it's about giving back programs within companies, and what do you think?
Oh yes, I think it has a real impact on the corporate culture, because it makes people feel that they're in an environment that really cares. And we see that, for example, you know, at Starbucks, what they're doing with employees, you know, it creates a certain culture that affects also how you treat customers. I remember a friend of mine told me that story of how he went to Starbucks, and, you know, his Starbucks card, when he went to buy something, didn't have enough money, and he didn't have his wallet with him, and he just looked kind of disappointed. And, you know, the barista said, "Here, take it." You know, that's kind of attitude that is connected to a culture that includes giving back in what the employees and the leadership are doing.
So for our last question, I'm actually going to do something that Diane, our editor-in-chief, sent me, which is a series of very quick questions that we'd like you to answer in sort of 1 or 2 or 3 word answers. And it's just going to be a quick series. And these are all from Diane, who's so good at this stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Favorite ice cream, vanilla.
All right. This one is not going to have that answer. Is Hillary a shoo-in if she runs?
No. There are no shoo-ins in American politics. Remember, she was supposed to be a shoo-in in 2008.
This is true. Man or woman you would most like to meet, dead or alive?
Oh, dead or alive. I would love to meet Joan of Arc.
That's good. What's the most played music on your smartphone?
Oh my God, it's embarrassing. It's a country song. Beer for my horses.
Oh, I love it. What's your most used app, not including HuffPo or AOL, on your phone?
Actually, it's an app which is it doesn't say HuffPost and it doesn't say AOL, but we created it. It's called GPS for the Soul. And I really love it because you create your own personal guide of the things that help you distress in under a minute, and then you can share guides with friends.
Common misconception about you?
That I have an accent. It's completely untrue.
Favorite food indulgence?
Oh, my God. You know, my favorite food indulgence, I just abandoned it. It used to be cafe lattes, but I gave up dairy. And now it's become soy latte or almond latte or hemp milk latte.
And it's just not the same, is it?
It's not the same, but you know, I'm getting used to it.
Okay, and last one. While you sing your country song with no
Yes.
accent, right? Okay, last one. What do you want to be remembered for?
So I don't really care.
I love it. You've been amazingly fun. Thank you so much. And she's going to be here to sign books. Thank you, everyone, for coming today.